So everyone, this is Chevalier's Books Online. We are extremely proud to be the oldest independent bookstore in Los Angeles. This is our 80th year in business, of hopefully countless more to come. And tonight we're so excited to be hosting Sholeh Wolpe and Suzanne Roberts to celebrate both of their writing and both of their wisdom, but in particular to congratulate Suzanne on her recently released travel memoir, Bad Tourist, pictured here in this beautiful orange book. And for those of you who don't know, Sholeh Wolpe is an Iranian-born poet, playwright, and literary translator. She is an amazing performer, and we'll be so lucky to just get a taste of that tonight. Sholeh has taken on fellowships and residencies from Mexico to Australia, from Spain to Switzerland, and her most recent work was a gorgeous translation of Attar's The Conference of the Birds, which you can get, of course, at Chevalier's Books. Sholeh will be helping Suzanne unpack tonight's guiding theme of journeys. Suzanne is also the author of the memoir Almost Somewhere, 28 Days on the John Muir Trail, and the winner of the National Outdoor Book Award, as well as 4 books of poems. And tonight, Suzanne will be talking about Bad Tourist, where she takes us across 4 continents to 15 different countries. Without further ado, please let me hand the proverbial microphone over to these 2 amazing women. Sholeh and Suzanne, the stage is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations, Suzanne, on your beautiful book. And I'm so glad to be here to really be presenting you and your book. And Chevalier is this fantastic bookstore in my neighborhood, Larchmont area in Los Angeles. And I want to ask everyone to please support your local bookstores. Keep them alive. And sorry about my weird background. We had totally like lighting problem, background problem. Okay, so Suzanne, what should we do? Should I just do a little bit of reading to, warm everyone up for your fabulous reading?
Well, yes, please. My favorite part of the night is going to be listening to you read. So please.
No. We're here for you. Okay, so I'm going to read some translations for you. I'm a poet and playwright, but tonight it is about celebrating others, celebrating Suzanne, and so let's celebrate Attar, who, if you don't know who he was, Rumi considered him a master, his master, 12th century Iranian Sufi mystic with a lot of wisdom. And the book, the story is the story of the birds of the world who get together to go on this journey to find their sovereign, the great Seymour. The bird Hoopoe leads everyone, and just as they're about to take off, they all are frightened that they don't want to go, just like the rest of us when we're about to take this journey, this important journey. Suddenly we're scared, we stay back. So the book is full of these beautiful stories of these birds, their fears. It's really the journey of the soul. It's full of gorgeous parables. So at this junction in our history, with the sitting president failing to give up his throne, I want to read a parable from the book that I hope it reaches our president. Parable of a spider. Have you ever observed how a restless spider spends its life weaving and scheming? It busies itself with shrewd delusions and spins its home in a corner. It wondrously weaves a web perchance to ensnare a common fly. And when it succeeds, the spider sucks the blood from that lost creature's veins. It wraps up the fly right there in hopes of a fine nourishment for days to come. Then, suddenly, there's the real master of the house, standing on tiptoe, stick in hand. In one breath, gone is the spider, its hard-won fly. That's the world for you. Wealth is that fly in a spider's web. And then Attar says, and this part is in poetry, the world may seem securely yours, but it will vanish in a wink of an eye. If you are proud of your titles and possessions, you are a child indulging in shadow play. Don't go after dominion unless you have a donkey brain. Real estate is for grazing cows, idiot. If you love the spectacle of drums and flags, you're not a wayfarer, but a dead thing. The hollow sound you hear is just the wind, the flap that flaps the flag and beats the drum. The clamor is worth less than half a note of a single beat. Your garden and mansion are your prison. They are the blight of your soul. Get out of this dustbin. Don't brim with smug vanity. How long will you make this world your stomping ground? I think that's really good advice for all of us, really. And the Conference of the Birds, I can say this because it's not my book, it's Attar's book. I translated it, but it's by this fantastic, incredibly wise man. All of you should have a copy and get it from Chevalier. Now, I'd like to introduce my dear, dear, wonderful friend, Suzanne Roberts, and take it away, Suzanne.
Oh, thank you so much, Sholeh, and thank you so much for hosting us. And yes, please buy books at your local independent bookstores. They need our love now more than ever. And hopefully when we're all out and about again, Sholeh and I can do this in person at Chevalier. And I'll look forward to that moment. So I'm going to read really short as well. And I'm going to read two selections that take place in India. And I chose these selections because Sholeh is one of my main characters in my book. And I have students all the time ask me, like, how do you write about friends? How do you write about family? And how do they feel about it? And so we can ask Sholeh after I read how she feels about it. But one of the things, I may have been a bad tourist in my travels, and I'm always trying to be a better bad tourist, but I've always chosen people to travel with who are just a little bit smarter than I am, or even a lot smarter than I am, I think, which is the case with Sholeh, who have been like the hopo, the bird guide, like showing me sort of the way in sort of gentle ways. So I'm going to go ahead and read two really short sections out of Bad Tourist. One is from an essay called 3 Hours to Burn a Body. And I'm actually going to skip the Varanasi burning of the body part in this essay and just read a couple of pages that take place the day earlier. It's a flashback in the essay in the Varanasi train station. And I think it really epitomizes sort of this idea of the bad tourist. In the train station, a little boy, no older than 7 or 8, had approached us. He held a plastic shopping bag in one hand and a sick baby in the other. The baby had matted hair, a dirty bare bottom, and her eyes were glued shut with dried pus. The boy held out his bag. Shampoo, he begged, soap. I had taken the travel size shampoos from our hotel, so I dug through my purse to give them to him. Sholeh took a photograph of the 2 children in the slant of morning light, the juxtaposition of the beautiful and the horrific, making the scene all the more tragic. I handed over the shampoo and the boy dropped it into his bag. A group of children saw this exchange and surrounded us. They begged us for school pens, soap, shampoo, 1 rupee. A little boy showed us miniature carved animals and said, elephants, very good luck. A beautiful young girl with brown feckless eyes and unevenly shorn hair held out postcards and said, for your family. Sholeh bought a few sepia postcards and I bought a tiny wooden elephant. The children didn't seem to notice each other, their eyes set on us. A beggar sat on the concrete looking at us. His nose seemed melted into his face, his fingers fused together. I didn't know leprosy still existed, but would later learn that India had the highest number of new leprosy cases in the world. I reached into my purse and fished out a power bar I had brought from home and handed it to him. He held it with his wrist, looking at the shiny wrapper. I realized there was no way he could open it. I took the bar back, telling him in English, which is perhaps more ridiculous than the power bar itself, that I would do it for him. I unwrapped the bar and placed it back between his wrists. He looked at the congealed energy bar with what seemed like curiosity. It didn't resemble any of the food I had seen in India. Let's go, Sholeh said, tired of watching the absurdity and horror of the scene. Since I didn't know what else to do, I waved a goofy half wave and we walked on. He nodded. I wanted to believe I had done something good, but I knew I hadn't. Sholeh and I waited for the train, and a teenage boy holding a small wooden box caught my eye from the other side of the station. He strode over to me, passing stray cows and a turbaned man reading from the Quran. The boy weaved around a small girl who had lifted her skirt and was peeing on the concrete platform. The boy reached me and pointed to his box full of blackened rags and shoe polish, and then to my sandals. No, thank you, I told him. You need a shoe shine, he said, motioning to my sandals. Very dirty. Although he was right about my shoes, they were dirty. I said, I'm fine. I have very good polish. It's not that, I said, knowing there was no way to explain. A cow with an injured leg limped by. Sholeh could tell I was wavering, and she said, I wouldn't let him do it. Just tell him no. She wasn't being unkind. She was originally from Iran and went to school in the Caribbean and Europe, so she was much more educated about the ways of the world than I was. She also let me make my own mistakes. Please, he begged. What could be the harm in it, I asked. Don't say I didn't warn you, Sholeh told me. While the boy set to work on my leather sandals, I looked at Sholeh's pictures of the Taj Mahal built by the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan for his favorite wife after she died in childbirth. Artisans spent 22 years building the dome mausoleum and decorating its walls with intricate patterns of semi-precious jewels. The Taj glitters in the moonlight, sparkles in the reflecting pools. Our guide had told us the artisan's hands were cut off at the completion of the project, so they couldn't betray the emperor by recreating the elaborate designs. I felt a tug at my foot and glanced away from the camera's digital screen and down at the boy. He pointed to a large rip in my sandal, telling me in his limited English that would cost extra for the repair. I spotted the pointed instrument he had used to tear the leather. It was already tucked back into his wooden box. Later, I would wish I'd listened to Sholeh, but more than that, I'd be ashamed that I didn't just pay the extra money and have the boy sew up the tear. But in the moment, I was travel raw and tired, so I thought instead of my own loss in the transaction, my new travel sandals ruined. And I thought about how I didn't want him to trick anyone else, and about what was right and what was wrong, which of course is much easier when you have the means to buy yourself a pair of $100 shoes. What was really wrong was the inequality in this. But at the time I said, I know you did it on purpose. You tore my shoe with that tool. Sew it up right now or I'll scream. The boy quickly stitched up the sandal and I didn't pay extra for the repair. Only later would I realize his family could have lived for 3 months off what I paid for those sandals. He didn't rip my shoe out of meanness. but from desperation. Sholeh didn't say, "I told you so," even though I deserved it. And I didn't tell her I should have listened to her because that was obvious too. The train arrived and a middle-aged couple stepped off with their guide. The husband told the guide, "I hope we're staying somewhere nice. My wife likes opulence, you know." "Deserves," the wife corrected him. "Well, then," the guide said, "she shall have the sky." All right. So the essay goes on and goes back to Varanasi. I wanted to read something just a little bit lighter to finish. It's just about a page and a half. And it takes place in southern India. We've started in northern India and then ended in the south, where we stayed with a lovely family, and then went down to Alleppey, which is where this essay takes place. And we had decided to take yoga lessons. Stretching the thigh fat. I noticed a sign at our hotel offering yoga lessons and told Sholeh, "Let's sign up." I'd been practicing at home and was determined to take yoga in India, the place where it all began. We changed into our sweats and went to meet our instructor, a young man in his early 20s, lanky and big-eyed. He led us to a room that looked like a dining hall, but the tables and chairs had been pushed against the walls. He instructed us to lie down on the concrete floor. The air outside was hot and thick, but inside the air conditioner hummed from a wall unit in the corner, circulating cold air with a hint of cardamom, lemon polish, and mop water. We were his only students. "Do we get yoga mats?" I asked. "This is real yoga, no mats." Determined to do real yoga, I followed his instructions. "The floor is a little cold," Sholeh said. "You will become warm," our teacher told us. He went over to turn off the air conditioner and open the window. The brackish, humid air pushed into the dining hall yoga studio. Our instructor then came back over, kneeled down on the floor between us, and yanked on my leg. "I must pull your leg this way," he told me, "to stretch it." "What about the asanas?" I asked. "Don't we do the poses ourselves?" "Don't you want to do Indian yoga?" He left me and edged over to Sholeh. He sat down cross-legged next to her, rubbing her arm. "It just seems a little strange," I said. "It's not like at home, not even a little bit." "Have you done yoga in India before?" he asked. He had me there. I admitted that I had not. "Well, this is real yoga." He progressed from massaging Sholeh's arm to tugging on it, as if trying to dislodge the arm from its socket so he could bring it home with him. "Ow," Sholeh said, so he went back to a slow caress. "My teacher at home studied in India," I tried. "We don't do it this way. What about the sun salutations?" "But this is India, a 25,000-year tradition. Do you argue with that? Things are very different in India." He reluctantly left Sholeh's arm and instructed her to lie in Shavasana until he could return to her. He then came over to me and wrenched my leg with vigor. "That's too hard." "You have children?" He continued his stretching work. "No, ow, why?" "And your friend," he pointed to Sholeh. "I have 2 children, she said, still in corpse pose. "Well, the reason you are inflexible," our teacher told me as he jerked at my leg, "is that you have too much thigh fat." "Thigh fat?" "Yes, you have thigh fat and that's why you don't stretch. And no children?" He shook his head with disdain. "Your friend, she has an excuse, 2 children, but you," he wagged his finger at me, "you have no reason and even more thigh fat than your friend with the 2 children. You have no excuse whatsoever." He yanked on my leg, nearly succeeding in popping it from the cradle of my hip. Our instructor finally left me and my thigh fat and walked back over to Sholeh, who looked like she might have gone to sleep. He called over to me, "You can do your sun salutations now if you want." I got busy with my sun salutations, thinking about how I knew this wasn't right, knew this just because this was India didn't make it real yoga. Then I thought about how during yoga, I'm supposed to notice my thoughts and let them go rather than engage in internal arguments. I tried to concentrate on my breathing, wondering what would come next, and if my ideas about yoga had been wrong all along. Maybe after years of practicing at home, I didn't know what yoga really was. I tried without success to still my mind. Thank you. So Sholeh and I, thank you. Sholeh and I are going to go ahead, and we have a couple questions for each other while you guys think of questions for us. And you can write them in the chat or raise your hand if you want. So either way, but we thought we'd start, talking to each other first to avoid that sort of uncomfortable pause where people are thinking of questions.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question,
Okay.
Suzanne. Have you always been a bad tourist?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, you're a wonderful travel companion, though.
Well, thank you.
Say. I really thoroughly enjoyed my trip with you through India and other places that we've gone together. It's how long did it take you to finish this book?
Well, a long time. The first essay takes place in 2003, and the most recent essay I think takes place just a couple years ago in Scotland. And as you know, the trip that I just read about was in 2007, and I started by writing poems about the experience, and I have a number of poems about some of the similar experiences, sort of looked at in a slightly different perspective. But then I realized I had a lot more to say, and I thought I needed to write a book of prose about these particular travels. And so I think in earnest, I really started writing this book in about 2008. And then once Almost Somewhere went to press in 2011, then I really got serious about it. So it's probably taken me about 10 years to write this book. And it takes place, so many different places and times. And I arranged the book in sort of an arc of self-discovery rather than chronological. So like some of these trips, right, that we took together, some are at the beginning, some are closer to the end, because I think that's how growth happens, right? I think you can be a good tourist and a bad tourist in the same hour, right? And hopefully you're a good tourist more often than a bad tourist as the years go by. But I think that there are times in every trip and in every day where I'm trying really hard to be a better tourist. And of course, we hear the word tourist and it's got negative connotations. So bad tourist is a little ironic, but I tried to show sort of that growth through different experiences. Yeah. Now I have a question for you. So you've read my book and you've read the experiences I've written about in India, and I wonder if there's any experiences we had together that you would be more likely or have written or told a story about that I overlooked, because we can have the same trip, right? And my stories are different than yours, even though we're in the same place.
Yeah, it's well, one story that we had and together, and I think it's very, very interesting and actually telling of our world that I didn't see in your book, is that when we were in southern India, I had a book out, and so when I arrived, there were like TV cameras, and they came to the house of the person who was hosting us, and they were interviewing me. And then when they found out that Suzanne is an American writer, they said, would you please sit next to her while we interview you? And that was fine. And it was a long news segment. And the way they had, we didn't know this, but the way they had our names down, they had said Iranian poet Sholeh Wolpe and American writer Suzanne Roberts. And it was fine. So now we're on our way back to the United States. We have to change planes in Germany, I believe it was.
Yeah, Frankfurt.
And she was taken off. She was taken off somewhere else into the security area. And then the lady said, yes, your name is now on a list, on a flight list. And we were like, Suzanne, you know, I mean, because Suzanne is Suzanne. She's not like she's not political. She's not a political writer. And so it turned out that this American writer sitting next to this Iranian terrorist writer, I mean, you know, somehow had flagged her. Could you tell them how long you were on that list, Suzanne?
Yeah, I was on the list. It was in the Bush years, and I was on the list until Obama got into office. So I got taken off a number of planes. I got searched, and my luggage gone through in Beijing. It followed me for a while. I was on the no-fly list, and it's funny because I have a line or two in my book about that, and I had a lot written about it, but it didn't seem to fit in the book. But it's an interesting thing because I actually thought about reading the part where all the journalists had surrounded you in that bookstore, in the communist bookstore, and I even thought, oh, I have a picture of that, right, where they've got their microphones and everything, and I decided to read something a little bit different. But yeah, no, that was something else.
That was a strange time, yeah.
And I was really grateful that you got off the plane with me. I was like, is she going to go home to LA without me?
I know it was a very strange time because as we arrived, actually, and maybe it had a little bit to do with that, Suzanne. They had, I don't know if you remember, Saddam Hussein had he was in hiding, and there was a autobiography of Saddam Hussein that had been published, right?
Yes.
And so they were celebrating Saddam Hussein's book, and they wanted to launch it at the same time as my book in this town, Kochi. And I found out about it, and I said, no way, I'm not gonna just enemy of your enemy is that, is not my friend. It was crazy. And I think, Suzanne, it was for that reason. Yeah. I mean, Saddam Hussein being in the mix.
Yeah. It was his posthumous writings that were being published, and they're having a party, and they invited us, and we didn't go. But but yeah, I mean, that was part of it too, is that this bookstore, the very next night was after they hosted you, they were hosting a party for the posthumous writings of Saddam Hussein, because he had already been killed by then. Yeah, that's crazy. But I also have another question, and I want to know, my husband and I, as I told you, Sholeh, had a long talk last night at dinner about this. He hates being a character in my books. He hates it. He wants me to write novels. He is not interested in being written about at all. And he says it's because I highlight the wrong things. But I wonder what your view is. Like, how do you feel about, I mean, I counted, I think you've got like 5 chapters in my book out of 30 something. Yeah. So how do you feel about being a character in somebody else's memoir?
I don't mind it if the writer is ethical, and I think you're a very ethical writer. You check with your characters, and maybe you want to speak to that a little bit, what your process is, because I remember you gave me the opportunity to say no. And and of course, I wouldn't say no to your writing, but I would not want to be I do not like to be in somebody else's memoir, because ultimately, when you write anything, it's only from your own perspective, and it isn't fair to your characters if you don't check with them and verify that was also their perspective. I don't know. I think you're a very ethical writer, Suzanne.
Well, thank you. No, and I do. I check with everybody and make sure, and I let people read it, and I let people have veto power. Most of the people in the book were fine with their real names. So I used their real names, except for my ex-husband wanted me to use his real name, and I didn't. And my current husband wanted me to use a fake name, and I didn't. So the only people I don't listen to in my life are husbands. But I just thought it would be weird that I have this husband, and all of a sudden I'm reading about someone called George. People would be like, "Oh, how many husbands has she had?" And I didn't check with my ex actually about this. I changed his name, and I told him I was writing a book, and he he said, well, I have never done anything wrong, so please use my real name. But I didn't feel comfortable doing that. So I don't know if he's read it or not. And he's not a big character in this at all. He's in one chapter, I think. But everyone else, all of my friends said, yeah, except for one, I did change one name. But I gave her the option. I said, I'll cut that chapter. And she said, no, don't cut it, just change my name. So I do run it by people, and I think it's important to give people veto power. And I almost somewhere I cut some things that Erica didn't like. Again, Erica and Dion both gave me permission to use their real names, and I sent them the manuscript. So I think you have to do that if you're writing about other people, especially if they're still in your life. I mean, if it's an ex-husband or something like that, then they're not in your life anymore. They probably aren't going to read your book, and you change their name and no one knows who it is. It's no big deal.
Yeah.
So should we start taking some questions? I do have some more questions for Sholeh if there are no questions, but are there any questions from the audience? Because we would like to have a discussion with you guys.
Sure. So again, anyone who has a question, you can drop it in the chat box right now. Or if you know how, you could click the participants button and then click the raise hand button that shows up after if you want to ask your question yourself. I'm going to use my power as host to ask the first question, which is, Suzanne, you talked about how tourists have a bad rep already and how bad tourist is almost a redundant phrase. So I'm curious about, do good tourists exist, and sort of what are the key elements to keep yourself from always being a bad tourist?
That's a great question. I think it's a continuum. I think that we bring with us our cultural blind spots, and we bring sort of the way we expect things to be to other places. And so when we get tired, when we get hungry, when we've had a hard day, that sort of that behavior comes out, I think, where we expect to be able to not wait in line for very long, or whatever we are used to at home. And I think that the way to be a better bad tourist, first of all, I've learned a lot from traveling with people like Sholeh, who was always more worldly than I was. And she understood a lot of the culture when we were in India that I didn't understand because of her upbringing in the East. So we crashed a wedding in, was it Pushkar or Khajuraho? Do you remember? Pushkar. We crashed a wedding, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was so uncomfortable that I made it worse, because here you can't just crash a wedding, right? You can't go hey, look, they're dancing, I think I'll go enjoy myself. That's really looked down upon. Whereas Sholeh, being from the East, was like, no, having people from another country come to your wedding is an honor. And she was right, but I made this big fuss about it. And so I think by researching and knowing, and I do a lot more research now when I travel. I've ended up in eco lodges that were not eco because I didn't do enough research. And I really think doing some research, learning a little bit of the language if you can, and really trying to understand, you can become a sort of a better bad tourist. And also really being careful where you spend your money, make sure that it's going to local places that are locally owned, and not huge hotel chains that are owned by Americans or whatever. So I think there are certainly ways. Yeah.
For sure. So we did have a question pop up in our chat room. It's from Bilal Shaw. Sorry if I said that wrong. But they're asking, Suzanne, do you plan on going back to India anytime soon?
Hi, Bilal.
Assuming after the pandemic.
Yes. Hi, Bilal. Yes, and I would like to visit your family there. I know Bilal, and his family is from India, in the north, I believe. And yes, it's on my list of places I'd like to go. Sholeh just got to go back to a literary festival in Jaipur, and I was so jealous that I couldn't go with her. So yes, I would love to go back to India. It's definitely on my list. And I'll tell you what, this morning when I woke up to the news that the Pfizer vaccine is looking like it's a 90% efficacy, my first thought was like, oh my God, thankfully all those people in nursing homes will have visitors again. And my second thought was selfish. It was like, I got to get a plane ticket. We got to go somewhere. Like, we're going to be able to travel again, And so traveling is definitely something I've really missed during this pandemic, and something I'd like to get back to ASAP. Yeah.
I was gonna say, as a person who travels so much as well, how have you managed to maintain your sanity the last 9 months or so?
I I took up mountain biking, and then I broke my arm. I mean, that's sort of true, but I really decided that I needed to find the joy in I live in a beautiful place. I live in South Lake Tahoe. It's absolutely gorgeous. And my husband and I have been super, super careful. We really haven't socialized with anyone except for Sholeh and her husband, and we all got tested and stuff like that before they came to visit us. And I really found a lot of beauty and in my place where I am. And I used to mountain bike here and there, but I really started mountain biking. I mean, I think I was on my bike over 100 times this summer, and I really started taking more risks and stuff like that. And then of course I ended up with a compound fracture, but I really just tried to find the beauty in where I am. And my husband and I bought a van, and we took a few like close to home van trips before I broke my arm. I haven't been able to camp since this happened, but we're actually hoping in the next couple of weeks to be able to get back to camping in the van. So that's how I've done it. And Sholeh, you travel more than I do. How have you maintained your sanity?
I've been very busy with work. So the work has actually sustained me a little bit. I'm working on a screenplay, so that has been just keeping me in front of my computer. Suzanne, what is your next project? What are you working on right now?
Well, I was just going to ask you the same thing, because I think what you're working on is really exciting. And I wanted to ask you about genre, because you work in so many different genres. So can you tell us first what you're working on, and then I'll reveal what I'm working on?
I'm working on a screenplay. I'm not allowed, I have a contract, so I'm not really allowed to tell you what it's about. But it's a feature. And yes, I write, I'm a playwright, I write drama, and I find this fluidity between genres really feed my spirit. I can't stay within a single genre. I get restless in it. And I love the stage. I love drama more than anything. And I really feel that all those years of writing poetry, which is condensed language, really prepared me for writing in other genres. So that's for me. And I teach at UCI right now. I'm the writer in residence there. But you're working on something really exciting.
Well, I am. And I was just thinking, when you said that, I was thinking like Federico Garcia Lorca. He was a poet and playwright, and he's one of my favorite writers, actually. Yes, so I have a book of essays about grief that will be out in 2022. It's called The Grief Scale. And it's essays about all kinds of loss. So not just, we've had a lot of loss in the last few years. My parents, my husband's parents, a very dear friend, but also like loss of like friendship, and loss of innocence, and loss of all these different kinds of loss. So I'm working on that, and there are some travel pieces in there, because I think I'm really seeing a connection between place-based or travel writing and writing about loss. And so there's an essay about environmental grief, the loss of landscape. And also just when you think about an airport, like it's usually a place that people are when they're grieving, right? Because they're going to and from. And then now with COVID, my father-in-law died and we couldn't go. So we like sat in the house looking at each other, and it was a weird thing to not jump on an airplane. So I'm really working through some losses that I've had in the last few years. And that book was due to my editor couple of days ago, but I haven't gotten it finished because of my arm. I haven't been able to type. But I'm going on a writing retreat starting tomorrow, and I'm hoping to get it a draft finished, and it should be out in 2022. Yeah, so that's what I'm currently working on. Yeah, and I see that there's some numbers in the chat, which means there's probably questions.
Yes, so we did just get a question from Claire McCulley. They're asking, Suzanne, what do you think is the biggest difference between who you were in Almost Somewhere versus the version of yourself in Bad Tourist? And I'm gonna add to that, versus the version of yourself in this new book you're writing right now.
Wow, Claire, thank you for that. That's a really good question. So in Almost Somewhere, my narrator is 22, and she was really clueless, like even more clueless than my narrator in Bad Tourist. Hard to believe, I know. But I was looking back, with 20 years space, and I really didn't like my narrator in Almost Somewhere, and had a hard time finishing the book because of it. And one of my mentors, who's still my mentor, he was my undergraduate creative writing teacher. He told me that I should look at my younger self like a daughter who drives me crazy, but I love. So that's sort of how I approached the narrator in Almost Somewhere, who was very interested in what boys thought of how she looked. And I inherited that from my mother. And she was very unsure of herself. But she was also very optimistic and idealistic, and really wanted to create her own view of sort of nature, because she'd read all these male nature writers. And I think she was on a really path. I talk about her as if she's a character. She was who I was. She was on, I think, a good path. And then shortly after I got back from that trip, my dad died. And I got really spun out by that. So my mom just recently died. My dad died back then. And so I was in graduate school. Didn't know how to deal with my grief. I ended up, just kind of, I have essays about it in the new book, but I ended up getting pregnant by the wrong guy, having an abortion, just all this stuff that I don't know would have happened if I wasn't in such deep grief. I mean, it's okay that it happened, but I think that tracing it back, that's sort of what made me kind of spin out on the sort of path that I thought I was so clearly on. And so then, in Bad Tourist, I had sort of, recovered through that grief, and was sort of what I thought was back on track. I was moving to Lake Tahoe. I was, getting married. I was, living the life I thought I always imagined. But then I realized that I put the life together too quickly, and I didn't want to be married to the man that I was married to. And so that sort of started this journey of escape, really, through to other countries, but then really thinking about then, going deeper into escape so that I could come home. And I think there's like pieces of my early narrator in this later narrator, like especially where she gets in the fight with the teenager on the airplane, right? Or does things that are really immature. And I think we're always like that. And I think Sandra Cisneros described it as like, we're like an onion, right? Like that we keep peeling, but there's still there's these layers of us, but we still have the inside in there, and so we carry a lot of stuff from our childhood, from our young adulthood. And so the narrator who I'm working with now, though, is a lot smarter. She really has figured things out in a much greater way, because she stopped and looked at it. I've done a lot of work and thought a lot and written a lot and read a lot. And so I'm not saying she's wise by any means, but she's way wiser than the character in Bad Tourist. But that's a great question. I've never even thought about really that until you asked it. So thank you. Yeah.
So again, everyone, this is going to be our last call for questions in the chat box. I do personally have one more for the both of you, which I want to make sure to get in there, which is, I'm always curious. So we talked about genre, but I'm curious about, have you ever started writing something and then in the middle of writing it, realized that you're not writing it in the correct genre? Like if you were in the middle of writing something and you're like, wait, this should be in verse, not prose, or something like that? Or do you know from the inception of the feeling or the concept what it's going to look like when the words come out?
Sholeh, do you want to go first?
Sure. I always know I don't start in the wrong genre. I've never done that. I mean, I have written poems that I thought maybe they need to be prose, but no, that hasn't occurred to me. I from the onset, I always know what genre I'm writing in. What about you, Suzanne?
No, I'm the opposite. I'm never in the right genre. I think that's really funny and it's not surprising to me that we come at that totally oppositely. But my master's degree is in fiction writing, because I thought I was going to be writing these like short stories about a young woman who, liked the outdoors and slept with too many men. And then I realized, right, that, well, I don't really want to write this as fiction, because it really wasn't fiction. I want to, and I didn't know about creative nonfiction back then, because we didn't really have programs in creative nonfiction. I'm dating myself. We had poetry and we had fiction. So I realized, well, poetry, you can write either things that are made up, or you can write things that are about your life, and you can mix it all around. It doesn't matter. It just has to be true. It doesn't have to have really happened. So I started writing poems, and I wrote tons of personal poems, and I never had to say, oh, it happened to me or not. And then I realized, okay, yeah, I can actually expand on these. So sometimes I'll even now sit down and write things that I think, oh, I think I have a poem in me, and then it becomes an essay. Or I've written essays that I pare down to poems. And this book, Bad Tourist, started out as a straight memoir. It was, and I think Sholeh, you read an early version of it. It was called, I think it was called Between Men and Countries. Mm-hmm. And it was a straight memoir, and it wasn't working. And so then I realized it needed to be in sort of disparate essays. So I never know. I mean, I'm always surprised, but I just, that's why it takes me so long to get things done. Yeah. If someone told me write a screenplay, I'd like end up with like, prose poems or something.
Yeah.
Okay, so no, go on, Sholeh.
No, I was just saying that's good. That's good that you explore.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. I think it's probably, I don't know. I was with I had a meeting with a student today who's a fiction student in the MFA program, and she keeps writing creative nonfiction. And so finally today I said, what are you going to do for your thesis? Because you're not writing fiction and you're in the fiction track. And I kind of hate that we have these tracks, but I think hearing that Sholeh and I come at this totally differently, but are completely cross genre, I think should probably put people at ease, right? That you don't have to do it all one way or another, that every writer's different. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's such a pleasure to see you, Suzanne, and to see some other faces that I recognize and some names I recognize. It's nice. It's a nice gathering.
Yes.
And I want to apologize for my camera. It's like
fine.
You look great. So I want to give a very warm thank you to Sholeh and Suzanne for sharing their homes with us today and their time, and everyone for joining us on this Monday evening. Chevaliers is always very grateful for our authors who support us and make us a special bookstore. Again, I'm going to go ahead and post the link to buy Bad Tourist in the chat box. Or you could just reach out to us at chevaliersbooks.com, ask for Sholeh's most recent work, Attar's Conference of the Birds, or of course, Bad Tourist. And before we say goodnight officially, Suzanne or Sholeh, any last words for us?
Suzanne, it's your event.
I just want to say thank you. And I want to say, thanks for having us. And also, Sholeh, thanks for doing this with me. It's really fun. I'm going to tell a little story that's going to make me sound like a crazy person. It's like a 2-minute story, but I met Sholeh up in Tahoe at the Community of Writers, and I met her because she'd stood up and introduced herself, and I had recently gone to a psychic, and the psychic said, look for a woman with big curly hair, because she's going to help you in your career. Right, you got braids in today. And so she just said that, and I thought, well, I believed it, half believed it, whatever. And then I ended up at this Squaw Valley. Oh no, she had said, you're going to hurt your neck, and when it starts to feel better, and I'd hurt my neck and it was feeling better, Sholeh, and I thought, oh, my neck's feeling better. Sholeh popped up to introduce herself, and I thought, oh, there's my friend with the curly hair. And so I like beelined over to Sholeh, and normally I wouldn't do that. I'd be a little bit more intimidated to just be like, hi, I'm going to be my new friend. And I just was like, hey, I'm going to be your friend. And we hit it off. And so thank you. You're helping me right now with my career. So it all has come true. So thank you so much. I'm really grateful that you've been my friend and colleague and in my life, and my sister. Yeah. Oh,
absolutely. You've enriched my life as well. And thank you everyone for coming. I hope, as we say, inshallah, we will all gather in person after the vaccine is out and we're out of our little cubby holes. And I am really tired of Zoom. So I would just basically get out there and hug everybody. I don't care if they want it or not. They're going to get a kiss and a hug from me. And stay well. And thank you for coming.
All right, thank you everyone. Have a great rest of your night. Hope to see you at Sholeh's book sometime soon. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.